If you plan on buying or selling any real estate in the state of New Jersey, anytime going forward, you're going to want to listen and watch this entire video going forward, probably bookmark it because the changes are coming quickly here on August 1st, 2024. Now, I was going to break this into a couple different videos, do shorter video series, but I feel that it's better to keep this all in one place. I don't want you guys to have to keep track of more than one link or more than one video. So I'm going to break this down into three chunks. The first one is going to be the big picture. What happened? What's changing? What do we have to do about it? The second two chunks, one is going to be geared towards if you are looking to buy a home, what is the major impact? How do we change what we're going to do? How we're going to operate going forward? And the last but not least chunk is going to be geared towards selling real estate. Again, what has changed? Why did it happen? What do we do? So let's dive right in. So there are going to be better descriptions of what I'm going to give you here. I'm going to keep it very, very short and very sweet. But if you're curious, if you have no idea what I'm talking about when I say the NAR settlement, you're going to want to Google that. Now, there's going to be misinformation out there, but I want to give you the big important points of why this happened, what is going to change, and what we're going to do about it. So the short version is there was a class action lawsuit brought in the state of Missouri that has now impacted everybody in the entire country. That's agents, buyers, and sellers. Now, the effective date of this settlement resolution is technically August 17th, but New Jersey jumped the gun here and made all of these changes that were agreed to in the settlement state law, and they go effective August 1st, 2024. So the reason this lawsuit was brought about, in short, was because buyers never had the ability to negotiate their own representation. What I mean by that is obviously you can pick an agent. You could pick anybody you wanted. And what you heard from a lot of agents, and this was dumb in retrospect, was that you're not paying anything, right? We represent you for free. Yes, we get paid at the end of the day, but you don't have to pay anything out of pocket. So that led to buyers doing what I feel was the best thing for them, was picking who they felt represented their needs the best, who they felt gave them the best chance of success, and who they trusted the most. There wasn't a factor for these buyers, for anybody, of how they were getting paid. So that brings me to the second point of how was compensation previously done and arranged. Most people, if you had to ask anybody, right, who bought or sold a home, who owns a home, who's not an agent, it was, oh, well, the seller pays for it. Yes, that is true. If you were to look at the closing sheet of the last time you bought a home, the seller on their side, you would see commission to their own agent and to the buyer's agent. Whether that was the same agent, different brokerages, it didn't matter. It's how real estate has worked for a very, very long time. But I personally have had and will continue to have a different view of this. And part of where my view, what I'm going to share with you, differs from everybody else's is where a lot of this confusion is going to come up, where there's going to be stress and frustration, I think, from a lot of consumers out there. In my perspective, the buyer was always really paying everybody's compensation, both agents, both sides, even though it wasn't coming off of their side of the settlement sheet, it wasn't coming out of their pocket, it is included in the sale price, right? So the seller, if you were going to be selling your home, hopefully your agent brought you what we call a net sheet. You could see, if we sell your home for this particular price, here are your estimated closing costs. And a big portion of that, usually the biggest portion of that, was agent commission. So the listing agent and the seller would negotiate and agree to that up front, right? Regardless of the buyer, regardless of who the buyer's agent was, that part was just baked in. So the listing agent and the seller would agree, here is what the total compensation is going to be should we sell this home. Whether you, the listing agent, bring a buyer, whether we cooperate with other agents, which is what everybody generally did, putting it in the MLS so that everybody's buyers could see it and everybody was working together to get homes sold. And should that happen, general practice, this was not law, this was not required, which was another part of this class action lawsuit, is that it wasn't explained properly. So listing brokers in general, and I'm going to use broker and agent interchangeably just for the purpose of this video, they are different roles, but listing brokers would generally say, hey, let's say we agreed hypothetically to a 6% commission. I, the listing broker, am willing to share half of my commission with the buyer's broker at closing. So yes, the seller is paying the buyer in theory, but really it was the listing broker who was compensating the buyer's agent. So instead of deciding this in a court of law, there was a settlement that was done outside, right, with the major brokerages, and it was generally done on a one-by-one basis of whether they were going to agree to the terms of the settlement or not. The National Association of Realtors was involved in this. Most agents and most brokerages are covered by this settlement, not all. But going forward, buyers are going to have to pay for their own representation. That would be out of pocket at closing. That is really one of the biggest changes here. Now, that is going to harm first-time home buyers. Theoretically, VA and FHA buyers are not going to be able to do that because it's not allowed under what the current VA and FHA rules are. Government's working to change both of those things, but there's going to be a potential gap here where that's going to cause problems for people. But in short, in a continually growing and rising housing market, it's going to be very hard for a lot of buyers to actually do that. So there are going to be a lot of changes that come from all of this. And I want to take a step back and now look at things from the seller side, because if you are thinking about selling your home, if you have your home listed, or if you're just curious, you may be thinking to yourself, well, that's great. Sellers get to save some money, right? They now do not pay for the other side's, right? The buyer's representation. So they're going to save money. I'm going to challenge you to think a little bit differently. Stay with me here, right? We price homes based off of comparable sales. I think we can all agree that, generally speaking, both the listing agent and the buyer's agent's compensation were included in sales prices for all homes up until this point in time. So going forward, if you are going to say, I don't want to pay a buyer's agent anything, right? The buyer's on their own, they're going to pay for their own representation. I don't have anything to do with that. But I still want to price my home in line with all these comps, right? I want what my neighbors got, or I want more than what my neighbors got. You can't really have it both ways. Now, it is always a seller's right to decide what they want to offer for their own representation, and in the past, for the whole package. A lot of the excitement, I'll say, in the general public coming out of this settlement case was, oh my gosh, we're going to be able to basically pay agents nothing. This is going to be great. They're going to have to work with us. There's a difference between having the ability to negotiate and an agent's willingness to accept a client, accept what I personally call a project. Just because a seller says, hey, look, I don't have to pay anybody anything, right? I'm going to pay 1%. By all means, right? You have always had the ability to find an agent willing to accept 1%, but you cannot, haven't been able to, and will not be able to arm wrestle agents who have higher standards for themselves, for their services, for their business. There have always been discount brokerages. There have always been options, for example, of listing in the MLS, but having to do everything else yourself for a few $100s. For sale by owner has always and will continue to be an option. If paying commission is really your biggest concern, your options haven't changed, right? This hasn't impacted you at all. But my encouragement to clients of mine, to future clients of mine who have entrusted me to help them sell one of their, if not their biggest asset, is going to be to view the offering of compensation, and we can't call it compensation. That's another part of the settlement going forward. We can't reference commission. We can't advertise in the MLS any amount that a seller may be willing to offer as what I'm going to call concessions to the buyer. We can't talk about any of that in writing if it's through the MLS. Agents, we're going to have to communicate a lot more with other buyers and buyers agents. There's going to be a lot more communication back and forth done, not written down, to find out, right? Hey, this new listing just hit. I'm going to call John, the listing agent, and see if the seller is willing to offer any concessions, right, to a buyer should they decide to purchase this home. And again, there are going to be sellers out there who are going to say, I'm not offering anything. There are going to be clients like mine who are going to continue to offer concessions, because at the end of the day, the size of the pie really isn't changing here. It's just where we're cutting it. So if the seller is going to say, hey, I'm not going to offer anything to this buyer's agent, they can pay for it themselves. As a buyer, to put our buyer hat on for a minute, wouldn't it be wise to factor that into your offer? Again, you're going to be looking at comps that were based off of you, other buyers, not having to pay for your own representation. You're going to factor that in. So On the whole, I don't see a lot changing here. It's not going to drive down house prices. I saw a lot of chatter about that over the previous, I'll say 3 to 4 months about, oh my gosh, this is going to bring everything down. Finally, I'm going to be able to buy 5 homes if I want to. That is out in la la land. That is not practical. There is no logic that would support anything like that. What this is likely to do will thin the herd of realtors. Not that it's an easy job, it's not. I think a lot of people got into it or get into it because they feel that it's going to be this walk in the park. I'm going to make easy money. It's not the case. So even though the market has really done some of that already with sales volumes down, I'm speaking just in Ocean City. Obviously, this is applicable in a lot of places too. We're going to have more agents decide, you know what, this just isn't worth it. I'm going to go back to a 9 to 5 job. I'm going to start my own business. I'm going to do whatever it is I'm going to do. And it's going to thin the number of realtors. Now, me personally, right, I'll give you just an insight into my head, right? I can only handle a certain number of clients at a time. I can't have 50 clients. I can't provide the level of service that I hold myself to more than maybe 15 people at a time. And even that's pushing it. So if there are less agents, there's not going to be fewer people buying homes. In theory, right? I'm not going to sit here and charge more for my services, but hey, if there's that many people who are reaching out and continue to want to work with me, it's something that I'm going to have to consider. It's just how the free market works. So at the end of the day, this is supposed to help consumers. It was supposed to help buyers be able to negotiate their own agents' compensation, their own representation. And that did give buyers the ability to do that. However, it's going to be very awkward, and I'm going to explain why here. Again, this is still the big picture. We're not even specific to buyers or sellers here. This is still phase one. So you got to stick with me here. It is definitely going to be worth your time. As it stands, I've always been encouraged, all brokers always encourage their agents to have buyers or potential buyers sign what are called buyer broker agreements. Now, these buyer broker agreements are for a defined period of time. But the big part of that, it relays and lays out the responsibilities of both you, the buyer, and me, the agent, so that we know what we're getting into. We know who's responsible for what I'm going to do for you, what I expect you to be able to do in a timely fashion so that I can do my job. But the biggest part of this for anybody is going to be the compensation piece. It has always been in there. This form has always existed. It's being tweaked a little bit. But basically, there is a part of that agreement that says, hey, if you, the agent, require certain compensation, whether it's 2%, 3%, a flat dollar amount, whatever it is, and the seller's not offering that full amount, I'm willing to pay the difference. Now, I've never used these forms because I built my business to avoid friction. And the worst thing that I feel that you can do is have somebody reach out, be excited to go see a house, or you meet them somewhere at an open house, wherever. And all of a sudden, hey, before we do anything, let's talk this out. And we have to agree what I'm going to be compensated should you decide to buy a home. We may not know each other that well yet, but we have to do it, right? Otherwise, I'm not going to work with you. Doesn't seem very fair. I actually got quite a few clients and buyers who successfully purchased homes reach out to me because the agent they contacted wouldn't even engage them in a conversation, would not answer their questions, would not do anything without them signing this form that ties them together when they don't even know each other. It's ridiculous. Well, that ridiculousness is now law. Any agent that you speak to is going to bring this to your attention. And by law, any agent cannot show you a home, cannot show you a piece of property without one of these signed. So let's unpack that a little bit. You are going to have to agree that I'm going to work with you, the agent, and I'm willing to pay you this amount, right? We have a conversation about what we feel is fair and what we're both willing to do. And if we can come to an agreement, great, we can now go see a house. If we can't come to an agreement, then we can't come to an agreement and we're not going to be working together. It's a very weird thing to have at the start of a conversation. And even myself trying to think of how much can I delay this, right? Can I sit down with somebody for 1, 2, 3 hours, get to know them a bit, figure out, what the best service I can give them will be. Right? What is the likelihood of this person actually being able to find what they're looking for? Can I help them? Is really at the core of it. Am I willing to sink hours, right, of my time, which is the one asset that none of us ever get back? It's the most valuable thing out there. Before I know if we're going to work together. right? Before I know if they're going to be willing to pay the fee that I require. Probably not. So there's going to be this awkwardness. There's going to be this friction that never existed before because it was all baked in. It was smooth. It was seamless. And you, the buyer, just got to pick, who do I trust the most? Who do I feel has my best interest at heart? Who am I excited to work with? That was the only choice you had to make. But now this is going to be like a speed dating situation where you have to find your fit in a pretty awkward way. Before you actually get to know each other, you're going to have to make that decision. So I'm going to wrap up this big picture piece with one more comment, and then we're going to go on to the buyer section. So in a nutshell, if I had to say, what is this all about? Does it really make a big impact? I don't. I don't think it's going to have a massive impact on the price of homes that sell. I don't think it's going to have a massive impact on the process at the end of the day. But it's going to make for a very awkward start to relationships. It's going to make for a lot of confusion and misinformation out there for both buyers and sellers and agents as we're all trying to feel our way through this, because this is the Wild West now. There's going to be, again, agents who have the ability to charge a retainer fee. There's going to be the ability for an agent to just say, hey, look, I'm going to charge you an hourly rate. Does that seem fair? Whether you buy a house or not, right? That's my model. That could end up being a deal for the buyer. That could end up being money out the window, right? There's going to be a lot of different things that people try. It's going to be a confusing time, but at the end of the day, it's really not going to change that much. But what it's going to amplify, whoever you do choose to work with as a seller or as a buyer, your agent better be able to explain all of this to you in a way you can understand, be able to give you confidence in what this process is, because it's going to be very easy for misinformation to happen again, for information to not be provided because it's not required by law, even if it would help you, right, avoid extra costs, if it's going to put you in a better position. These are all things that all of us as agents are going to be learning on the fly. But it's going to make the high value agents even more high value. And in theory, that's going to allow them to charge higher fees for their service, for their commitment to you. So does it really help consumers in the end? I don't think it does. I think it's going to be a very chaotic next few months. And I'm going to be here, right, talking you through all of it, giving you use cases and stories as I can, as it's appropriate to do so. So if you haven't already, make sure you definitely hit subscribe, because there's going to be a lot more coming. Now, buyer-wise, the biggest change here is obviously this buyer-broker agreement, right? We already talked about this, but again, that friction is going to be palpable. It's going to be odd. You're going to likely want to shop before you get there. Now, you do have the ability to feel things out, and where eXp Realty has kind of pioneered a lot of things during this period to get us prepared, one of the things that they have pioneered is what we call the single property buyer broker agreement. This is not a long-term obligation. This is a, hey, I appreciate you reaching out, let's just say, so you call me, right? I want to see this property. Hey, I'm sorry, we can't do that like we used to, right? We have to at least at a minimum agree to A, B, C, D, and E before we can do that. Does that sound reasonable, right? Any agent's going to have to do the same thing. But I personally have this single property buyer broker agreement because, let's be real, not everybody's a fit for everybody. That has been the case in the past. It's going to be the case in the future. So what this single property buyer broker agreement will allow us to do is make sure that we're a good fit for each other. And if we feel that we are a good fit for each other, that we want to work together to get you to your end goal, then we can have that discussion of, let's have a longer term agreement. While it doesn't remove the friction, it does provide for flexibility, because again, there have been people who I have met or who asked for my services that I did not feel that we were a good fit, right? For one reason or another, and vice versa. It happens all the time, that there's just something that's not right. The energy is not right. Just doesn't feel like it should. So that is going to be a huge tool. Now, again, from a compensation standpoint, you still have as a buyer the ability to negotiate, right? That's how all of this works, and it's going to continue to work that way. This compensation piece or this concession piece is going to just be another layer to that. So again, as a buyer's agent, I will call and see, hey, X, Y, and Z property are offering some sort of concessions. Maybe we can find that out up front. Maybe it's a yes, they're willing to offer concessions, but they haven't specified exactly what they are willing to offer, because it's going to depend on the offer. right? It's up to them. We're going to be able to find out the information we can get, period, end of story. But if we're at that point, we are already under a buyer broker agreement. You and I have already agreed that we're going to work together. And even if the seller says, I'm not going to pay anything, I'm not offering anything to you to offer to your own representation, to your own agent, we're going to work together. Now, an interesting call that I was on with the New Jersey Association of Realtors was there's going to be a checkbox, or that you have the ability as the buyer to instruct me as the agent to not even send you or show you any homes that are not offering partial compensation, full compensation. You have the ability to do that. I can't do that because it's steering. It's illegal. But now, as a buyer, you have the ability to, again, look out for your own best interest. And if you are not able or willing to pay out of pocket at closing, because that's when it would happen, for your own agent services, you have the right to only see homes that are offering for that coverage, partial or full. So that is a huge deal. Now, at the same time, just like we see all the time right now, a seller says, I'm not going any lower than I'm at. Lo and behold, push comes to shove, you make an offer, you negotiate. They went lower. Surprise. My perspective is even if a seller says they are not willing to offer any concessions whatsoever, that doesn't prohibit you from trying. It does not prohibit you from making an offer. And again, if they're looking at the pie as already being whole without any concessions, do you have the ability, if you have the mortgage capacity, right, to say, I'm willing to pay you X% or amount over what we had agreed to? If you then reimburse that as a credit at closing, as a concession to pay for my representation, you have every right to do that. So again, the pie itself really doesn't change here. It's just a lot more complicated to see what the different pieces are. There are going to be layers to this where, again, an experienced, knowledgeable agent is going to be able to guide you through this. So as a buyer, those are your big changes. Again, buyer broker agreement, you can't just go see in whatever house you want with no agreed representation anymore. It's not required by law that you have an agent if you decide to have one. Otherwise, again, you can schedule a showing for yourself and go unrepresented. That's an option. You don't need representation. You can hire an attorney off to the side and do your best. I wouldn't recommend that, but that has always been an option and still will be an option. Again, the major choices haven't changed. It's just this standard normal transaction is going to look and feel a lot different. Now, one last nugget for buyers. Again, thankfully, eXp Realty has rolled out their own versions of these New Jersey forms. They're a lot less complicated, a lot shorter. One is a 4-pager or a 5-pager even for the state. It's a 1-pager for us. We have ways of making this easy and straightforward. If there's any of those things that you want to see, certainly just reach out. Let me know. We can have those conversations. I'd be happy to share what I can with you. But on to the final piece of this, which would be if you are looking to sell your home, what's the difference? So the whole conversation about commission, which was usually the big hairy sticking point in these conversations with sellers anyway, doesn't really change. The difference is you are now only negotiating the listing broker's, your own representation's compensation. Again, I believe there should be a secondary conversation of what are we willing to offer in terms of concessions for a buyer to expand our pool, right? It's a marketing tool. It'd be silly not to have that conversation. And again, if you understand the impact of it, you're going to want to do that. However, as a listing broker, I can no longer share with any other agent or broker on the buy side. And there's some stuff. I actually had a Keller Williams agent call me yesterday because they had heard from their broker that they had heard that eXp Realty is no longer willing to work with any other agents or brokerages. It's just everything's going to be eXp sold within the company. And that is absolutely untrue. So if you've seen anything like that, it's not the case. There's a difference between compensation and cooperation, and eXp, again, being ahead of the curve, basically came out to the world and said, look, we cannot compensate any other brokers. Well, guess what? No listing broker can compensate any other broker going forward. We can cooperate with everybody, as we always have and we will continue to do. And all brokers hopefully continue to do that. But we cannot compensate a buyer's broker. So if there's going to be compensation or concessions, it's going to have to come from the seller. It's going to have to come from you. It cannot come from me. So it's still recommended, again, that you offer concessions. Now, our broker has recommended that we do not put that out in writing anywhere because just like it is now, once it's out there, you can't take it back. If you're offering a certain amount, you are now obligated to pay that. The buyer or buyer's agent would have a case to bring that against you should they choose, because you tried to renege or change the amount after it was already provided in writing somewhere. So recommendation is just may offer concessions, right? And in the phone calls that we have with buyer's agents, we can have that discussion. Now, it is recommended from where I sit that we should still talk about a hard amount, whether it's a percentage or a dollar amount, just like we have in the past, because buyers need to know that, right? Again, it's going to be coming out of their pocket one way or the other. So in general, right, your closing costs are going to decrease as a seller, in theory. However, again, that is likely going to be a piece of the pie that on the whole, it doesn't change. It's just, it looks like that got better. But at the end of the day, you're likely still going to net a similar amount as you would now under the current rules. Now, an agent that I actually ran into today in conversation brought up the fact that from their perspective, and I agree with her, that there's actually room for discrimination to occur now, whereas it was completely agnostic in the past, because the seller now can negotiate this on a deal by deal basis, right? It can be discrimination against a buyer. It could be discrimination against another agent or a brokerage. We don't know. Hopefully none of that happens. I'm going to do my best to make sure none of that happens, that we play it fair as always, but this just opens up new doors. But the biggest change, in my opinion, from a seller standpoint in the state of New Jersey, the seller's property disclosure form, which is a multi-page form, was optional in the past. It is now required that you disclose as much as you possibly can about the property. You may not know all the answers to all the questions. Unknown is a solid option, but it's now required going forward. So that is the big picture in a nutshell. And again, there's a lot of other questions I've gotten. What if my home's already listed? If I'm going to be listing soon and I haven't agreed to X, Y, and Z, what do we do? Happy to talk through those one-on-one. My contact information is down in the description as always, or you can drop your questions right in the comments and I will dive in as soon as I get them. But this is going to be a big deal. And again, if you haven't already, I highly recommend you subscribe to this channel, because I'm going to be bringing you as much as humanly possible about the changes as they roll out, trends I'm seeing, patterns that are developing, so that you can make the most educated decision possible, either getting to or leaving Ocean City. So that is it. Thanks as always for hanging out, and I will see you next time.